Hi, in this lecture you will learn the functions in PLSQL, the differences than the procedures, and how to create functions. Up to now we learned the procedures in details. Actually, functions are pretty similar to the procedures but with only one major difference. Unlike the procedures, functions must return some value. When using procedures, we can get some values with using the out parameters. But in functions, we don't need that. Functions must return some value when you run it, but only one value. But do not confuse about that. Functions can also get the out parameters. That means you can get several values from the functions with using out functions just like the procedures. But functions return one more value. That value does not need to be assigned to a variable like the out parameters. When you call a function, it returns the specified type of value to the caller program. In general, functions are used to compute some values. You operate some logic and return a value. For example, you can return a Boolean value for the login successful check, or the result of some calculations, or maybe the salary of a specific employee, etc. When you use procedures, you generally don't need to get any value. But when you use functions, you intend to get some values. Procedures and functions are pretty similar in creating styles. We will see how to create functions, but the usages are different. You can directly write a procedure inside of your begin block, or you can call it by using the execute command. But you cannot do that with the functions, because functions must return some value and you need to use that value. You cannot run functions standalone like procedures. On the other hand, functions can be used within a select statement. That means you can either get the value of a function as a column value, or you can use it inside of a query to compare with some values, etc. This functionality is really useful. You can assign a function to a variable. It computes some value and the returning value can be assigned to a variable. But the type must match. I mean, if your variable is number, the return type must be number. If the function returns a record, you can assign that function to a record variable. Great, now let's start with how to create the functions. The only difference from the procedure creation is the return clause, just before the is or as keywords. We must write a return keyword and the type of the returning value. This type does not have a size specification. You simply write the type. If we don't write return keyword and size, we will get a compilation error. The rest is the same. We can still use the in or out mods, but it is not recommended to use the out mod within the function. It will not be a good programming technique, because the main idea of a function is getting a value after the execution. But if you need somehow, you can use. It will work anyway. But if you need to get more than one value with the function, I recommend you to return these values within a record or PLSQL table. Avoid using the out mod if you really don't need it, because if you need to use it within an SQL query, you will get an error. But you can use it within a begin block. Great, now let's do a quick recap about the differences and similarities between functions and procedures. Then we will make our examples. We execute procedures within a begin block or with the execute command, but it is used standalone. I mean, we cannot assign it to some variable or within an SQL query. On the other hand, we execute functions within an SQL query, or we can assign it to some variable, but we cannot use it standalone. We will see that. We can pass both in and out parameters to both of them, but passing the out parameters to the function is not recommended. Procedures cannot return a value without the out parameter, but functions return one more value with the return clause. Alright, now let's open up the SQL developer and start creating our functions. We can create the functions in two ways, just like the procedures. The first one is we can create it by using the SQL developer's connections tab. Let me show you that first. We simply expand our connection HR. As we can see, there is a functions branch here. Let's try to expand it. As we can see, we don't have any functions in here. These functions are also called as store functions because we store them under our schema, which is HR here. To create a function with using the tool, just like the procedures, we simply right-click on the functions branch here and click on the new function option. Here we specify the name of the function, return type of the function, and the parameters. When we click OK, we get the code of the function creation. But notice that we haven't created the function yet. It just gave us the creation code of the function. We create a function when we compile it or run that code. But here we can change the code before creating since it is not created yet. The second way is writing these codes manually. There is not much difference. The first one is a little. But I don't use the connections tab most of the times because there is not so much ease on this. Alright, to create a function, we write create command. If we want to replace, we write or replace command. Then we write the keyword function. Then we specify the function name, then the return keyword and the type of the returning value. Then as or is keyword. Then our begin end block. But inside of the begin end block, we need to return a value with the type that we specified in the declaration area. We can write return clause at anywhere of the begin end block. But if you don't have any reason, you should write it right before the end keyword, because the code after the return keyword will not be executed. When the program faces with the return keyword, it returns the specified value to the caller program and finish executing the function. So you can use return clause inside of the if block, etc. But notice that the block must return at least one value. I mean, if you use the return clause inside of the if block, and if that if clause is never satisfied, you will have an error. So be careful on that. But don't worry, we will make examples on this. Besides, we can return a null value even if we specify another type. But you cannot write null as a return type in the declaration area. If you do that, you will get an error, because if you intend to return a null value, why you should use functions then? You use procedures instead. But if you really need it, you can return a null value with the return clause anyway. By the way, we can write the name of the function or procedure right after the end keyword. This is not useful in a single function creation, but it is useful when you create a function inside of a package. We will see that in the packages section. Before creating our functions, I want to explain you the last thing about the functions. We can create our functions, but we should know that there are a lot of built-in functions that we can use with our codes. Actually, you may have seen some of them before, like length function, toChar, toDate functions, sysdate function, count function, etc. As we remember, these functions return some values when we call them. Besides, some of them take parameters and some of them not. We have used them inside of our SQL queries or PLSQL blocks before. Great, now let's create our first function then. Now I will create a function that returns the average salary of the given department ID. Let's simply update the related areas. Now I will change the name and write the parameter first. I write get avg cell, and as the parameters I write p-dept id. It is department id person type. Our return type will be number. So I will write number here. Now I need a number variable to store the average salary. So I write avg cell, it's a number. Now I will get the average salary into our variable. I write select avg salary into avg cell from employees where department ID is equal to p-dept ID. Let me copy that. Now I know that I need to return some value, so I will return our variable. I copy that and paste in here. Here I can write the name of our function, but I can write just and too, both valid. So I write my function name here. Let me copy that and paste here. Now let's run it. Great. As we can see, we could successfully create our first function. We can see it in the functions branch here. If you don't see your functions in here, you can right click on this function branch and click on the refresh. Alright, now let's open up a new worksheet and use our function. We know that we can use functions with two ways. The first one is we can use it inside a begin end block. Let's see that first then. For example, I can print the returning value. I write begin and end keywords, and inside of that I write dbms output.putLine, and inside of parentheses I write my function get avg salary, and its parameter is 50, for example. Now let's run it. As we can see, we got the average salary of the department 50 and printed that value. The returning value is used by the dbms output.putLine procedure. Means we use the function inside of a procedure. We can assign the returning value of that function to a variable. Let me show you that. Let's first declare a number variable. I write declare and avg salary, it's a number. Now I will simply assign the function to my variable. Let me copy my variable and paste in here and say that it is equal to my function. And now I will print my variable. Great, now let's run it. As we can see, we could assign our function to our variable. Now let's change the department ID and run again. Let's say department ID 80. Great, the average is changed. We can use the functions in if clauses, comparisons, calculations, etc. We can use functions in anywhere that we can use a variable. Do not forget that. The second way of using the functions is using it inside of a select statement. So let's see it within a query then. I simply write select employee ID, first name, salary, and our function get avg cell and the department ID as parameter. And the alias for that from employees table. As you can see, I used that function just like another column and gave an alias for that to increase the readability. Besides, I used the department ID column of the table as the parameter. Now let's run it and see what happens. Perfect. As you can see, our function is executed for each row. The department ID of that row is used as the parameter, and so it calculated the average salary of that department. Each time when the function is called, the department ID is taken from the related row. When you use the function within a select query, it is executed again for each row. And if you use a column as a parameter of that function, the column value of that row is used as the parameter. This is important. Great. As you can see, we got our employees, their salaries, etc. from the table and got the average salaries of their departments from our function. Now let's get the employees who get a higher salary than the average of their departments. To do that, I need to use our function in the where clause. So I simply write where salary is greater than our function and department ID. where salary is greater than our function and the parameter is our column department ID. Now let's run it. Great. We could use our function with the where clause. So we could get the employees who earn more than the average of their departments. We can also use it in order by clauses, group by clauses, having clauses, basically anywhere that you can use a variable. To see that, let's use it in group by and order by clauses. To do that, let's delete the columns before, because we cannot use another column name than we use in our group by clauses. So I simply delete here and copy my function and write group by our function and order by our function. Now let's run it. As we can see, we can use our functions in group by and order by clauses. We can also use them with having clause, values clause, connect by clause, start with clause, values area of the insert statement, and set clause of the update statement. But notice that to be able to use a function in an SQL expression, there are some restrictions. Now let's open up our slide then.